All right, good evening. Thank you for joining us for the October 8th Board of Education meeting. If you could all join me for a pledge to the flag. I pledge allegiance
to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
It's an interesting sign. Okay, we will start with a report of the superintendent. Dr. Byrne.
Good evening, and thank you for joining us for our October 8th Board of Education meeting. I hope everyone had a good long weekend, and Shana Tova to those who were celebrating. Our 2024-2025 school year back-to-school nights are in the books. Rye High Schools was a week ago last Thursday, and we heard a lot of positive comments about the night, especially the traffic direction by some of us in the hallways. Despite the challenge of the somewhat inexplicable arcane system of classroom numbering in the building. With some new classrooms on the books, we have some new numbers, and it didn't quite make sense what numbers were where, at least around the library. But people managed to get where they needed to go, and there were a lot of positive vibes. I know I got a lot of positive comments after the opening in the Performing Arts Center by Mr. Hara and the team there. And heard a lot of positives throughout the night from parents in the hallways. I'm delighted to report that we've received a lot of applicants in response to our calls for committee members for 3 of the district's working committees, technology, audit, and facilities. Thank you to the community for raising your hands metaphorically to do this important work. We did get an application from someone who lives in the Rye Neck School District and suggested they volunteer in the Rye Neck schools for their committees. Next week, October 14th through 18th, is NYSSBA's School Board Recognition Week. So I'd like to take a minute to thank our Board of Education trustees for their service tonight. I cannot stress enough how important their work is to the success of our school district. Not many school districts that have an incredibly functioning, successful, supportive school board. The school board trustees tirelessly provide invaluable support and feedback to all of us. I hope the entire community will join me in thanking these volunteers because although they're elected, they volunteer their time and talents, and even though they get an ID, it doesn't actually work and get them into anything, but to thank them for their hard work and dedication to our schools. And Sarah has a small token of our thanks for all of you. And that concludes my report for this evening.
Well, thank you. I will say that we are very fortunate to have one another on this board, and it makes being a board member much easier to be a board member when you have such wonderful board colleagues. So I thank and appreciate all of my colleagues who sit here tonight, so thank you. All right, we will move to presentation and discussion number 1 on the external audit. Ms. Paruccio, I assume?
Yes, thank you. Hi, everybody. So I just wanted to quickly say that as we typically do this time of year, we ask our external auditors to come to a board meeting after we've had a audit committee meeting, which took place last Tuesday evening. As a result of the work we do over the summer to essentially close our financial books for the previous fiscal year, which starts on July 1 of 2023 and ended as of June 30th, 2024. So this is the compilation of all of that that ultimately will then get submitted up to the state by the October 15th deadline. So without further ado, I'm going to turn it over to Justin Wood, our partner from Nugent Haussler, our external auditors, to give a brief overview of where we are today. Thank you.
You guys hear me okay? Now you hear me better. Very good. Thank you. Thank you, Gabby. And thank you for everybody who participates on the board and everybody who participated with the audit committee meeting last week. We went over the audit report in detail during that meeting. I will not bore everybody here tonight with that. However, I will, discuss just highlight some important things to touch on as part of the presentation for the board to accept the audit report. Before I get started, I do just want to thank Gabby and Kathy, the district treasurer, who joined us tonight as well. Both of them worked very hard, and their staff, in putting the information together in a timely and accurate manner for us to perform the audit. Having said that, as Gabby said, this is for the year ended June 30th, 2024. We met with the audit committee for the pre-audit meeting in early June, and then we're here in mid-August performing the field work for the audit. We presented a draft about 2 weeks ago before the audit committee, and then we went over that draft, finalized it during the week last week, and I am presenting that now. So just to touch on the important parts of the report, so within this report, there are 4 different opinions that we give. I'm not asking anybody to flip through pages or anything like that. I'm just going to let everybody know what pages they're on in case they do want to go to it at a later time. So page 1 is for the regular financial statements. Page 71 is for internal control. Page 73 is the single audit. And page 81 is for the extra classroom activities funds. In all of those reports, we gave what we refer to as an unmodified opinion. It's otherwise known as a clean opinion. It is the highest level of assurance that we can give for an audit. And just other quick points. One is that the district is in strong financial condition with well-funded reserves and did adhere to the 4% of unassigned or available fund balance set by New York State. And also there is a large ongoing capital project. This has been ongoing for a couple of years, which will wrap up over the next couple of years here at the district. And really, those were all the financial highlights that I wanted to touch on. So outside of there being any questions? Anyone? No? Well, thank you very much. I'm available for questions throughout the year. If anyone has any, Gabby has my contact information. You're more than welcome to shoot them my way. Thank you very much. Have a great year. Take care.
Thank you. I am fortunate enough to serve on the audit committee with both Matt and Tom, and I was at the meeting, and it was a really great discussion that we had and a really robust review of the audit report. And truly, when you go through it, you can see the detail and the attention and the work that is put in by our financial office. And so we appreciate and really are proud of the work that you all do, because this audit just speaks to the tremendous work that is done and the attention to the work that is given. And so we thank you for that.
And if I can, I just have to give a shout out to Kathy Vigiano, because as much as I am the Assistant Superintendent for Business, none of this and none of the pressure of the audit is on me. She really takes it on and manages it beautifully. So I'm very fortunate to have Kathy at the lead of our team and just all of the folks in the business office to do the work. We're very lucky. So thank you.
Anyone else? No? Okay. So we will now move on to our book talk, which is part of presentation and discussion number 1. And the book is Never Enough. Dr. Byrne.
Okay, so many thanks to the board. I actually tell other superintendents that every year our board reads a book together and then has a public discussion at a board meeting. And they look at me quizzically, wondering how that happens and how a board is willing to spend time reading and discussing. And again, going back to what I said earlier, that's because of this incredible board that we have. So thank you for that. The book, Never Enough, When Achievement Culture Becomes Toxic and What We Can Do About It, by Jennifer Brehany Wallace. She's actually a local author, raised children in Fairfield County. She was in Rye last year as part of Heard in Rye's conversations that they have in the community. So tonight we're actually going to use the same protocol, modified slightly for this setting, where each trustee has an opportunity to share a select a section from the book that you've selected that was particularly striking for you. You get a chance to read it with the group, talk through why you selected that. And then each other trustee then has a short period of time to make a comment off of that. We'll do that repeatedly so that every trustee gets to share a section of the text and then wrap up the conversation. So any volunteers or any questions about the protocol before Again, it's a loose following of the protocol. I'm not going to stop or interrupt anybody or mute you. I don't have the power to cut your mics like in some other settings that we've seen of late. There's no taser, although I know some people would like to have a taser. But anybody interested in kicking the discussion off?
Okay, I'll go. I will just say, I really like this book, like super like this book. We've read a lot of books. This is by far, I think, my favorite, maybe because I feel like it is so close to home. Interestingly enough, Jennifer Wallace, the author, focuses and calls out Wilton, Connecticut community, which is actually where I worked for a time. So it's interesting to have that perspective as well as now living in a community that she very well could have studied and written about. So on page 180, she says, despite our best efforts and our best intentions, the obsessive curation of our kids' lives is not helping them fly. Many of our kids are good, obedient, wanting to please us kids, are doing what they're told. They're doing their hours of homework, taking those cello lessons, waking up early to swim laps before school, checking the boxes of community service. They're following the ultra-directed path they've been placed on, but it's not giving them the meaning they seek. Ironically, our extreme focus on their growth and fulfillment and happiness is stunting them. It's, I don't even know, like it's so striking, and it's what I feared or what I've believed to be true about our community, our kids, my kids' life. And then to see it from somebody who's done research in all of these similar communities, and it is the reality, it's really trying to make sure to force the stop as a parent. And then what do we do? Where she talks about checking the box of community service. And you mentioned back to school night, and Mr. Hara talked about the box of community service. And my son is in that grade where they did a project. And so now he's only got 10 hours that he has to check. And what kind of fulfillment, what is that gonna do? I know what it's not doing. It's not getting him out there doing much. So it's that struggle. I haven't articulated any of this well because I don't know. Go ahead, somebody else has to say something.
So just a reminder, at this point, everyone will have a chance to make a comment based on Jane's section that she read, and then Jane gets to wrap it up with the last final comment after listening to all of you.
So I highlighted this. Well, I have the same feelings too. This has been my favorite book, my 7 years on the board, and I highlighted this passage too. And as you guys know, so I have a senior in high school, and when I read this, it struck me, the obedient, she's a good student, she does what she's told, that's what she's expected, and she's applying to colleges, and they're asking her what she wants to major in, and she's like, well, I don't know what I want to major in. Like, I'm supposed to be a good student. And it dawned on me, like, she's, worked all these years in high school, and it's really made me kind of take a step back of what, and the purposeful and the meaning of all of this. And so, to just doing it because they're told to, and they're good kids and they're obedient, but it's the why. Why are we doing this? So it struck me as well, and made me kind of rethink as my middle guys, going into 9th grade, how to reframe the conversations with him, and and look, as my parenting, and not just, having more conversations about why are we doing this, instead of just, like, they're not robots, just, I have to do it because I have to be a good student, so.
I just want to add to that, 2 pages prior to that quote, on page 178, was something that I had highlighted. And I think it makes a lot of sense talking about, right, what these children are just doing, the things that they're expected to do to make their parents feel good, just to kind of appease everyone around them and do the right thing. And what I had underlined here is, it says, up to this point, the purpose of childhood was straightforward. You do well in school, you go to a good college, and you have a successful career. Then think about how to contribute to society. So I felt like within that sentence, they're already putting in children's heads what the purpose of your childhood is, but they're leaving out the most important parts of it, right? They're talking about the purpose of childhood in order to succeed in life down the road, but I feel like they need to focus more on the purpose of childhood is to grow yourself, to learn how to matter, as it says in the book. And I just think that this is like a big jump that children do feel like, and parents do feel like they need to tell their children, you do well in school, you go to college, and then you'll have a successful career, and then you'll be happy, right? That's kind of the 4 things, but it's missing so much else. It's missing all of the mattering. It's missing the volunteerism. It's missing them being able to learn how to grow their own value. Like, I mean, these are children. I mean, 10 to 16-year-olds, like, how do they even really understand, like, what is their inherent value? What do they want for their future? Those are big questions, and like, are their minds even developed enough to think of that? And they're just being told what to do, and their minds, I feel like, should be circling in all these other things. And it's scary. The book frightened me, actually, when I read it. Every page I turned, you question your own parenting skills, you question where you live, you question what you're doing on every single page of the book, but it's eye-opening.
I guess actually maybe even what Callie was talking about with the, starting with why. I mean, I don't know whether that was another book that was read on this board previously, but Simon Sinek's book is phenomenal, where, exactly that, we're starting with the outcomes, but we're not actually focused on, why are we doing all of these things? And 2 little snippets, I don't have the pages because I used Libby for the audiobook, another plug, was it, parents say that they want their kids to be happy, but what they're really saying is they want them to be happy like they are, with a big house and a prestigious high-paying job. And another little snippet that I found interesting was just talking about achievement is a life raft in an uncertain world. And that one statement just really struck home because, obviously every parent wants to do everything that they can, to set your children up for, a successful life. But, what is the definition of success? And it may not be what you thought, it would be for your child. That they are going to have to come to terms and find their own solution to that question.
So, as you can see by my Post-its, this book struck a lot of chords, especially looking at sort of the evolution of, where I think where we probably as parents come into education with our kids, and then, kind of how that evolves as they get older, become more independent, just like you're talking about, that they might have different ideas of what they want their lives to be. But I think the difficult part about a lot of this book and also the passage that Jane was mentioning is that it's, and as we've talked about, as everyone sort of brought stuff up, I don't know that it's as explicit as it is, and they talk about a lot about intrinsic and extrinsic influences. And so I think, part of this as you're reading it, and Val, you just talked about that, was kind of frightening to read this because it becomes very clear to you as you're reading it how some of this probably is playing out not only around you, but in your own home and in how you approach your kids and within our schools and how the kids are influencing each other. But it's the recognition, and hopefully, from talking about this book, it's the recognition of looking and acknowledging maybe we need to understand better, what do we really want? What is the intrinsic value of the things that we're trying to do for our kids as families, in our communities, in our schools, and get back to that rather than the I can't say that word, extrinsic values that are the checking of the box, that are I did my 10 or 60 hours, depending on what grade you're in.
Some are more lucky than others.
But what did it mean? Was it something that I look back on and say, I feel like I contributed? Or was it that I had to do this, and so and it's a very I think I guess my point is it's a very challenging thing to figure out how to create an environment that gets more to that when you're surrounded in the world around you with very much the opposite. It's not about the intrinsic, it's about the extrinsic. And that's part of the reason for talking about this book and for why it's such an important read, I think, for people that are in communities like ours to kind of digest and acknowledge.
So it's actually interesting that you brought up some of those points, and it made me think about how early on in my older daughter's high school career, I felt very motivated to get her going on her service because it was a graduation requirement and her schedule was so full and it wasn't built in, and I kept bringing it up and I kept bringing it up and it wasn't happening, and it became a really sore point in our family. Because she wanted to do community service that felt very meaningful to her, and she was seeking out very specific opportunities that weren't available to her. Either she wasn't old enough, or like she had to wait till she was 16 for most of them, or they were just very competitive, and she couldn't get into the program. So she went through her first couple of years of high school without really doing much. And again, she was so overscheduled that there really wasn't, and she just didn't want to do something that wasn't meaningful. So like I did the opposite. I was like trying to check that box and get her to check that box. And she's like, well, I don't want to just be a camp counselor all summer and check off the box like most of the kids are doing, because that's not meaningful to me. So it's like interesting that you brought that up, and I was almost like literally pushing like the whole opposite. And then again, like reading the book, you see, it makes you realize like what you've been doing in your own parenting and the effect it's having on the kids.
Like the architecture class.
Exactly.
Where you don't realize it until your child kind of puts the mirror up.
Yeah, I mean, look, I think with all of these things, the awareness of them and focusing on it, but then the question is, well, what do you do with this information? How do you parent differently? How do you community differently? How do you school differently? And I don't think there's necessarily solutions. And the thing I think about in all this is to recall that there's no one size fits all. What is going to motivate one kid is going to depress another kid. What's going to excite one kid is going to create anxiety in another kid. And they could be the exact same things, the exact same paths, and they're going to go through things differently. And I think as parents, as administrators and teachers and all of that, as best we can, it's to sort of watch that and remember there is no one path, there is no one size fits all. And it's impossible to give completely individualized attention to every single child at all times, but as much as you can, watch for those signals and do the best that you can in recognizing, where to push, where to pull, where to relent, on all of these types of things, for how each individual kid is going to adjust differently.
Jane, you get the last word here.
The page before, they talk about that a study was done at the University of Michigan, and as a result of it, that they declared a narcissism epidemic in society. And, taking it back to kind of the work of the board and the work of the district, later on tonight, we will, through the consent agenda, approve our board goals and approve the RIE commitment. And in that, we talk about this idea of students becoming, global citizens who are helping and are making a difference. And we talk about social and emotional development and in helping to support the district's initiative around those kinds of things. And those things are what will help to reduce a narcissism epidemic. Those things are the things that in this book, Jennifer Wallace talks about mattering and having connections and being meaningful and feeling like you're part of a community. And I think it really is very important for us as an organization, because the organization really will help drive so much more of the conversations in homes and in the community, to think about what structures, what programs, what offerings are we providing for our kids from K through 12 to help address what is clearly something that is concerning among researchers and among parents and among kids.
So, go ahead.
Okay. So as I said, I really enjoyed this book. There were many passages I highlighted, so it's hard to choose one. But I chose this one because this kind of jumped out at me, because I hadn't really, the way it was framed kind of made me stop and think about it. And it's on page 115. It's under this section, worthy of protection. It says, as parents, we sometimes think our role is to help fuel and support our kids' ambition. But in a hyper-competitive culture, kids sometimes need the opposite. They need the adults in their lives to occasionally hold them back. And that's when I was like, what, hold them back? To prevent them from sacrificing their minds and bodies on the altar of achievement, and to teach them how to build the kind of life they won't need substances to escape. Mattering from a child's perspective means your physical and psychological limits are worth honoring. What the experts in this field have told me time and again is that our kids need wise balance keepers, parents who actively help protect their time, their energy, their health, and their integrity. It is not our role to support every endeavor, in other words, but to wisely challenge, to create guardrails that tell our kids they are not cogs in a machine, but people worthy of rest and preservation, to help them reimagine their ambition in an environment that tells them constantly to secure and acquire more. We demonstrate to children that they matter when we send a distinct countercultural message that they are worthy of protecting. And so the reason why it struck me is it was to hold them back. I just thought, when I read that, I was like, oh, wow. I mean, I hadn't really looked at it from that. Of course, we know we're supposed to protect our children, but I think we all, as parents, get caught up on this, this rat race that we're all in.
Well, and I think too, what that speaks to is so much of what when we've had presentations and talks about what Challenge Success tries to look at, is that idea of how do we find the balance of all the things. So, while, as you said, so we get caught up in we want to give them as much opportunity as possible. Sometimes it's hard for them to even feel like that opportunity makes sense if they don't have the ability to stop and reflect and have downtime and have connection time and have sleep. And so it's I think that's what came to mind when you were talking about this, is that wheel where you fill in the challenge success has done that exercise.
clock,
What are
yeah.
what are the
How much time?
how much time do you spend doing all these different things, or how do you spend your time? And then you look at it and you can reflect, gosh, how much do I actually have the ability to have a moment to reflect on what I like and what I don't like, when you're constantly going from one thing to the next.
And what are we doing as parents to reflect that need, that we value that to our kids? I think about in my house, how much downtime, how much reflecting, how much, is there time to say, no, I'm going to do this, or, dad needs to do this, and instead of constantly giving, going, and no, this is important for us. We're going to spend time together. We're going to because if we're not modeling it, we can, as with everything, right? We can say it a million times. It's not going to mean anything unless they see us doing it. And then in a school, if we're just giving homework just to give homework, right? So the kids have something to do with that time. Are we modeling the importance of the challenge success to say, you need the playtime, downtime, family time? What are we doing? What kind of thinking are we putting in behind all of this?
I think too with that, Jane, it's the idea of thinking, right, like what are we doing to be preventative versus what are we doing to just manage, right? Like what comes first. And like I say that as a nurse all the time, right? Thinking, right, instead of managing problems or managing the mental health crisis that we have now, what are we doing, and what can we put in place as parents, as educators, as leaders in our community to be preventative, right? So that this doesn't come up, because as the book says, this idea of envy and competition only makes it harder, right? The more envious someone is, the less likely they're going to speak up. They're going to become deeper and deeper in sorrow, and then that's going to lead to a mental health crisis right there. So there's so many opportunities to get in before those things happen, and I think identifying what we can do to prevent versus manage will be, of great help, I think.
Callie, with yours, I like the, just flipping the script idea where, instead of pushing for more, maybe the right answer is to pull back. And just a helpful little statement that she had in there that I thought struck me was, if a child's having issues with actually doing the work, get curious, not furious. And you just ask open questions, what's going on? And you can often find that, I didn't do the homework for a myriad of other reasons that can be addressed in a different way, rather than just attacking the action.
So I actually underlined the exact same passage as well. Well, I underlined a lot, probably half the book. But, and I stopped after reading that paragraph and I thought to myself, but how does that actually work? What would the practicality of that be? And I was thinking, so I have two very different kids. One, I could totally have that conversation and get her to dial back. But the other one, sometimes I feel like it's not just the parenting, the kids have this own set of pressure that they're putting on themselves, and I guess it's coming from competing with their peers and what's happening in their classes and at school. And she would never back down. She just adds more every year, and to the point that it's so much. And I don't think I could. I mean, obviously, I'm the parent. I could put my foot down and say, no, you're not doubling up on science this year. Or you're not doubling up on math this year. I know one of the parents in the book had the conversation about that. I think it was a math class, doubling up on math. But it's they just have this idea of who they are. And so for one of my kids, that's who she is. But I know it's not healthy. I know she's not sleeping enough. but I almost felt like, can I really do anything about it? Like, she's still gonna be that type of person if, I guess, the culture in the community itself doesn't change. Like, I don't feel like just the parenting piece could necessarily, like, break that down. I don't know.
I think with all these, the scary things to also think about, though, are what some of the alternatives are. So one of my 3 children, the other 2 less so, but one, focuses a lot on having me time and, breaks and things like that, which is on the one hand great and you're very sympathetic to it. On the other hand, 90% of the motivation is so you can sneak YouTube crack. So which I'll take stressed out over education over that. And so it's how do you find the dynamics within all of these things, because there are alternatives in all sorts of directions, and some kids you pull them back and let them go and they're going to do something, I was about to say productive, which is probably not the right word to use here, but at least not that. And then others are just going to go into areas that are, at least in my opinion, worse than some of the others, and making sure you find the right balance with those things.
Back to me. So I was going to tie in that passage to a passage that comes a little later, and it's about deliberate rest. It's on page, I can't read anymore. I think it's 135. I have my readers on. I won't read this one. It's, one quote, "Slowing down feels like such a luxury." And it talks about Malcolm Gladwell's book and the 10,000 hour rule. And then it highlighted deliberate practice. And so, and then it talks about sleep and how important sleep is. And Sean, about how some of these kids that push themselves so much they don't sleep. So I think that's, our job as parents is to try to tell them to turn things off. As best we can. And I was just thinking that I think our school does a great job. I was just at the back to school nights, and I know in the middle school, the teachers really emphasize, we're going to give a lot of homework. And, we want to, 7th grade, we're going to challenge them. But, if they're having a bad night, just send me an email. We understand. They need to get their sleep. In high school, I felt like it's really purposeful homework. I think you had said earlier, just busy work. It's not like we're just going to get 5 hours of homeworks, because then it looks like we're doing a lot in school. So I think that we as a district, and I think our teachers do a good job of this purposeful instruction and purposeful homework, which hopefully helps our kids. And then I'll just close out. There's a quote, I think it's by Lisa D'Amour, and it was going back to this talk about protecting our kids and holding them back. And it said something about the difference between a grade of like a 98 and a 91, and what's the difference? And she said, it's a life. And, that is not something as parents in our community that we think. It's like, you got to get the 99, you got to get the 99, so your GPA is high. But then when you frame it that way, that's, there's a lot between a 91 and a 98. Or she also talks about strategically studying. If you're doing well in this class, maybe you dial it back a little bit. You focus on some of these other interests or other classes. So it's just a good, I enjoyed this book so much because it just helped me reframe and kind of look at things. Not to just keep on doing it because that's the way it's supposed to be done, and we're supposed to do that as parents, so.
So if I could just add on to that. So I actually was going to use that quote and that passage about Lisa D'Amour, but I have others. But just the one thought I wanted to talk about it was, so in addition to the 98 versus the 91 and having a life, she talks about in that section as well how you have let's say you have 1 tank of gas and it has to get you through the week. So, and like you said, if you're doing well in this class, then use your gas in these other areas. And when I read that passage, for me, I felt hope, but maybe for the first time, that's something I could actually apply with my perfectionist child who is always going above and beyond and not sleeping. So for me, that piece was where I was well, that's actually something I could have that conversation and apply that and maybe dial things back a bit and get some control back and help her navigate that better. So yeah, so anyway, just adding on to that thought.
this can be my last comment, but as I read through the book, I realized that the positivity that came out of the book and the lessons that I feel like we're trying to be taught, right, to help put our children in a better position mentally and academically, none of it, you notice, has anything to do with social media to bring the positivity. Like the negativity, social media is definitely involved in a lot of it, but all of the strategies that they talk about to help children matter, to volunteer, and all these other things, not once are they using anything with social media, right? And they're not saying create a social media account to make yourself matter. It's kind of goes back to like the basic things that what we were doing when we were growing up as children, when we didn't have all that technology. And I was grateful to see that the solutions didn't have to involve social media and all this extra technology, that they can be done by just talking to a friend, like writing a nice note and putting it on their back, right? And having them collect all those notes, right? Instead of listing them on their Facebook page or things like that. And I felt like solace in that when I read.
I think my passage actually picks up nicely with what Val just said, so I'm going to go next, if that's okay. So mine is within the context of one of the areas of the book that talks about scarcity, which seems an odd juxtaposition to a community that has very little scarcity in terms of resources, but this is a different kind of scarcity. But it gets to a paragraph on page 39. While parents have always been responsible for launching the next generation, this responsibility has never felt so fraught or so lonely. We sense fewer and fewer guarantees for our children. We have, as the researcher Thomas Curran at the London School of Economics pointed out, absorbed social and macroeconomic conditions into our parenting. Parents engage in anxious, controlling, overly involved parenting, ranking 8-year-olds in soccer, coaching 5-year-olds for standardized tests to get into gifted programs, because we have become social conduits, socializing our kids to prepare them for the economic inequality and cutthroat competition that await. So this struck me, and it felt like it hooked into what you were saying, Val, because of some of the loss of the sense of community when you are in competition with, your kids are in competition with each other, and in some ways, families are in competition with each other, because it's this status building mechanism that happens when they're young. And it doesn't seem like it's that, because everybody does soccer or everybody does lacrosse, but then it becomes very quickly, well, we're not just doing this to learn the sport, but now we have to put them into A and B teams. And now, so it's not, again, also only about the academics. It exists throughout many other factions within the life of families and kids. And I think it's this sort of highlights to me that it's this slow burn that all of a sudden you recognize at one point, like, wait a minute, how did we end up having everything be so hierarchical and pushing to do more and more and more when our kids are 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10 even. We're not just talking about high school, which then by the time you're there, it's a very different environment.
I guess one of the things I did appreciate about the book was just providing a lot of facts and figures around a lot of maybe misconceptions that I had. And I guess just the point about the scarcity value, I liked her comment about, when judging life outcomes, however you want to judge them, there's no statistical difference in between, whether that student went to a highly selective college or not. And then within that, and I've definitely fallen victim to looking at U.S. News and World Report's rankings, and you say, oh, well, geez, so-and-so fell, what the heck happened? Okay, well, let's actually look at what goes into the ranking. Okay, well, 20% is reputation amongst peer schools. What's that? And then, 22% is graduation rate, retention rate. And does that speak to anything about the quality of the education that student is receiving? No.
I think from that section, Jen, that you talked about, the thing that I highlighted, it says, whether our efforts are motivated by neurochemistry or good intentions, they leave many of our children feeling like commodities. And the idea that we would, in the best of intentions, create this sense to a child that they're nothing but transactional is just, it is so against what every parent is trying to do. Yet when you boil it down, that's exactly how some of these kids are feeling. And it is just so disheartening, right? You want to go home and be like, I love you, right? I don't just care. Like, I really, and they're like, you're crazy. I'm like, but no. And they're like, sure. But it is, and it is, because it's more than just the conversation, right? Like to Sean's point, where your children live in your environment for a part of their day. For the least amount of time they're in your house, and the rest of the time they're surrounded by this community of people that they, in most instances, choose to be around. And they're going to vibe and build off of whatever they're around. And what then happens and how we help them navigate those things is really challenging when you really have them for the smallest amount of time in the day.
When you just read that passage and you were talking about the sports, I had a memory of, I think it was third grade, and my son was playing a sport with a parent's son, and I forget what sport it was, but we were talking about basketball because my son had been playing it for a while, and she's like, oh, he really likes basketball, but it's too late for him to start basketball. I was like, he's in third grade. So there is,
Ship sailed.
in this town and across the country, there is this, you have to get in so early. And you can't, if you're a late developer, a late bloomer, or you take an interest in something, it's, this whole idea of it's too late. And later in the passage it talks about, there's this common, the author says there's a common misperception that if a kid waits until high school to start building a college resume, as was standard, our generation, they're too late. And then it talks about this Hillary Levy Friedman points out that today's children face real credential bottlenecks if they wait too long to hone their skills, because they're competing against kids who have spent their entire childhood preparing with tennis lessons, math workbooks, travel soccer teams. So it's something you kind of move to Rye, and I think it kind of hits you in the face when you move here. It does seem like everyone signed up for a lot of things. And so it's hard to not fall in that trap as a parent of, I have to sign my kid up for everything. And I have to be I can't even just play Rye youth soccer. I have to play on the travel team. And then I have to, it quickly spirals out of control. So it's tough as a parent to kind of push back on that when it seems like everybody else is doing it.
Totally. And the page before, the passage that I read, there's a sentence that's pretty striking. It's what's left, it's saying exactly what you're saying. What's left now, as one woman put it, is the feeling that there's an express elevator headed up. If your kid doesn't get on early, they'll be left on the ground floor forever. Which we know is not true. So, but it's
a real fear.
What it feels like
sometimes.
Yeah.
Well, and to tie it back to the district, right? Like so far we've talked about the Rye commitment and challenge success. Well, this is that whole conversation about finding the right place for you. What is your right fit for going to college? And so again, it's, I hate to be like, the weaver here, but I'm weaving, because it's this idea that what are we as a district trying to do to help counter program some of this stuff. So it is, there is not an elevator that's going to keep you stuck. And, if you don't join the soccer team in third grade or you don't start basketball, then you'll still be able to go to college. You'll get a job. You'll have a life. You'll get married if you want, or if you don't, whatever. It's okay, right? But it is this idea that there is a responsibility for some sort of thoughtful counter-programming narrative conversations to have as a community in these high achievement culture communities to help address these things.
When I think about one small change that's not so small, this morning I was here at the middle school for Arrival, and after the bulk of the kids were in, I walked over to the high school, and I saw the kids waiting for the bus to go to the CTE program at BOCES. And we have more kids participating in that program than ever before. And it's something that used to be a negative here, and it's not anymore. And to see that large, I know I signed the paper at some point when we did the registrations, but to see the number, because we got two buses, and we used to have 2 kids if we had that. That's an extraordinary development in a positive way for our kids to see that there are other options than just the one that has traditionally been here.
Well, I think another positive on, some of this in these conversations on this topic was about sports. And absolutely, at all levels in the RIDE community, there are plenty of examples of pushing and got to be the best and got to be in this program or that program. The flip side of it, though, is I've actually been very impressed with how many options and variety there is. My oldest is 11, so maybe this stuff's going to evaporate when my kids get older. But, there's the right level in almost every sport for almost all kids, especially if you're willing to, sort of take the time yourself to put into it and have some humility. There are plenty of parents out there frustrated and get into this and that. 9 out of 10 times it's either because they think their kid's at a different level than the kid actually is, and they're trying to put them in a place that's probably not the best place for them, or some other dynamic in that. But there's a lot of parent volunteer coaches out there, along with the professional coaches, who are really looking to get kids in the right spots and then help them grow within whatever level they are at this age, and go from there. And that, for this community at least, I take, we can find plenty of the negative stories too in RIDE, but that side of it has been much more than I probably expected when I first moved here.
Back to me.
Go ahead, sorry. In these sports, because I'm just kind of getting into it, my kids are a little bit younger, but is the number one thing talked about teamwork and helping each other, or is it you need to go out there and do the best that you can do and do better than him and him, because if you don't, you're not going to make the team, the varsity team, and then you're done, right? It's focusing on, right, these teams should focus on teamwork and compassion and helping others and teaching others, right? The kids who are better, maybe they show the kids who aren't as great how to teach. Those things I think are also really important in the sports that we provide, and it's not just the competition between friends to who's going to get to rise to the top first or more quickly.
Yeah, for the most part, that's what I've seen with balances. Look, you can't put 40 kids on one team. You sometimes need to create separations. Sometimes there's a top team and there's a second team or stuff like that. So, and sometimes whether you're on this or that, can create frictions and all sorts of things. But within getting kids grouped onto the right teams and then from there growing from there, again, is it every team? Have I seen the opposite? Yes, but, there are people who take a different approach, but I would say the majority of kind of volunteer coaches and dynamics have that strong sense of community and across the leagues of really, sort of a top to bottom, approach. And sometimes it's mixing them all together. And some of our town leagues are built that way, where you're intentionally, like, you mix them all up and every team has 2 or 3 great kids and 2 or 3 middle kids and 2 or 3 not so good kids, and you play as a team together. And then there's others that go just sort of like, well, we're going to put the top kids here, the middle kids here, the middle, but then they grow within their levels. So it kind of varies.
And I'll just answer for Ryu Soccer. I'm a volunteer coach, and we have to be certified in a lot of things. And one of them, we have to take an online course called Positive Coaching Alliance, and I think it's every 2 years. And it's like 2 hours. It's quite long. And then you have to answer questions. You watch all these videos, and it talks about, as a coach, about teamwork and sportsmanship and why we're there. And so, that's just Ryu Soccer, but I think I think there are a lot of more programs out there that they're trying to bring to these volunteer coaches, because it's a big job as a parent, and no one's really trained us to do that. So I do think that that's the message that is trying to be presented in these youth sports organizations.
Not to be the guy that's jumped off the optimism bus, I will say that it is a tricky and challenging piece, certainly as kids work up through the levels in high school sports. It is a very challenging thing to push back against the culture of winning. And I think there are a variety of factors that play into this. And I had a lot of conversation about this over the weekend. I think there are some external factors that push it, in that, when people are hearing, register your child for this club team, or you want this club team, and you definitely need to get to this showcase, and there starts to create this pressure narrative around the sports that this is your meal ticket, or this is your ticket to the promised land, which is either being drafted as a professional or getting a scholarship into the university level. But at the same time, while all that's happening, there is a building culture of winning is the object, and that's really hard to push back against. It's something that I think, as a community, it is a conversation we should be having, because is the purpose of interscholastic sports about building young people and giving them skills for success in life, or is it about winning the state championship always? That's a hard question to navigate.
I mean, on that point, and again, I can speak on this with the naivete of not having anyone in high school yet. But I think on some of that, the answer, I'll change your question slightly, because it's not necessarily state championship, but just winning in a concept. I think the answer can be both, and I think the answer absolutely should be both. I mean, part of competition is competition, and you can teach both community and success and teamwork and all of that stuff while also organizing in a way to win. And to be perfectly blunt, kids get more excited, they get more interested when they win, and I firmly believe you can do both, and that you should be trying to do both. Now, obviously, when we get to the high school, and there's all sorts of things about recruiting kids across different things and pushing, and excluding to get on travel sports and, getting recruited to another high school, that's a different thing. And that aspect is that aspect. Or when it comes to bending rules and stuff like that, which I know goes on as well. But I think within the confines of a team, it is very possible to do both.
I don't know where we were, but I guess if we're riffing on the naivete without teens bit and the book, I guess the two thoughts that I had immediately as I started reading this book was, one, shout out to the administration and the teachers that deal with these teens. One statement I thought was fascinating was just that teenage negativity outperforms other age groups, making them hyper aware of threats in their environment, whether it's perceived or not. Just sort of interesting, just recognizing, these are the individuals that will be
I just want to say I needed that tonight.
Okay.
And so thank you, Matt.
Here, I'm
Thank
here,
you.
yeah.
I did.
Yeah, they
You
outperform.
just- oh,
They are
this is the
outperformers.
best. I love our colleagues. I really did need that.
But also, as I was reading, the early part of the book, actually, I sort of read it as, okay, actually, this is a how-to book for somebody without teens, and I can get them on the track. And I will admit, that was, okay, if this is the purpose of the book, I guess this is helpful. But obviously, that was not the point of the book. But what I did appreciate, as you're reading through, a number of, very challenging issues to untangle, just her commentary around intensive parenting and just the idea that the level of sacrifice and demands on a parent can often leave the parent with their needs unmet. 57%. There's been a 57% increase in time spent on parenting since the 1970s, even while 71% of women work. So that can mean that working mothers are spending more time in their kids now than stay-at-home moms did in the 70s when they did not work. Dad time spent has tripled, but dads are still 30 years, but dad years are they're still
Sorry,
30
can I
years
say that out
behind women. Yes, you're allowed to. Yep. They didn't actually provide it in a graph where you could see it, so can't actually. But just this notion that everybody's spending more time on their kids, and it's leading to this proximal separation where you're physically there, but you're not emotionally there. So fine, we've identified the problem, but let's actually talk about the solution. Yeah, I've heard the phrase, put your mask on first, and it was like, okay, perfect. It's like, no, it's not just put your mask on first. No, it's you find somebody that's going to put it on for you. You have a friendship group, you have your spouse, you have other people that you can help, and it's, you establish a board of individuals that you can reach out to when you need that help. I thought it was just a very helpful idea. Like, okay, this is what you need to be doing. Proactively seek help. The other one was just never worry alone. You want to normalize that support network. Explicitly ask someone to be their go-to worry person or committee. Like, okay. If anything's like, all right, do that. But anyway, that was my plug for the book as well. It was like, actually, this isn't just identifying problems. It's let's work on what the solutions could be.
And that part, Matt, where you talked about the mothers parenting more than they used to, right? There was this video that was on the Today Show a few weeks where she's the Venmo mom. And it's this idea that, like, I don't want to volunteer anymore. I don't want to help. Just tell me how much I owe you, PTO, and I will give you my dollars. And I get it, right? Because it is this idea that parents are, whether you're staying at home or whether you're working and taking care of your kids, they're a lot. They're a lot. And I think, like when my parents will come, and I am, for better or worse, a parent raised by a mother of the 70s who has, she'll come and she's like, whoa, you guys are doing a lot. She's like, really? And I'm like, yeah, I'm just like doing my stuff. I'm parenting. I got this. And she's like, yeah, that's a lot. And I'm like, yes, I'm aware you weren't here. I get it. You had other stuff. But it is, and I don't think we take the time to appreciate exactly how tiring, how much of the burden, the responsibility is now that exists than has previously, which is why that mom just wants to Venmo the PTO.
I think we've gone off the rails with our protocol, but Jen, any final comments?
I actually think where we landed was one of the points that I was making, is that, in the first sentence, it talks about it, and throughout the book, and I think, Tom, you've sort of made this point a little bit in various comments. It's really easy to be like, bad parents, you're not doing a good job, you're putting pressure. So I think it's important to take a step back and to look at where your own community is. Because as parents, especially if you're living in an environment that feels very competitive on all levels, and everyone's trying to achieve at a higher step than everyone else around them, as a status piece, because they talk a lot about status in here also, and I think that is certainly ingrained in communities like ours throughout the country. That remembering to take a step back and find the community piece of it, so it's not so fraught and lonely, because parenting is hard. And we more than likely are all, as parents, will experience or have experiences that are similar, and it's good to be able to talk about those things, because there are going to be moments where having that ability to find your worry friend or whatever it is going to be the important piece that will give you perspective in that moment as a parent, and you don't then lose your own ability to keep a perspective on what's actually happening. That the emotional piece is super high because it feels like there's a lot at stake, because there's such a scarcity of perceived opportunity. But the question is, what do we think the opportunity is? Is the opportunity only a college education? Or is the opportunity in equal balance going to a CTE program where you're getting different skills and different ways of approaching life that are put into your toolbox? I think that's where I would sort of circle back from the finding the connections in the community piece where you can, so that it doesn't feel so isolating.
Well, I think that's a great segue into where I had, which you had mentioned, the discussion about status. And so my quote's on page 28, but this is in the section where it's talking about status, and the sort of preceding paragraphs are about, that to our brains status matters and that can't be ignored. And then there's a quote in here that's a quote from someone else, and says, you can say that we shouldn't care about status, but if you fill a room of people who say they're anti-status, they would soon create a social hierarchy based on how anti-status they are. Wrote Loretta Graziano Bruning and I'm Emil. And I think, and that sort of goes to your point that you were making about we can't just go around being like bad parents. I mean, there is the reality that we're living in with all of this, and we can try to pretend that this stuff doesn't matter, but that would just be pretending. Some of the things do matter. They may not matter as much as they should, they may not matter as much as people think they should. But you can't just sort of be like, whatever, I'll get off the road. I mean, I guess you could move to the middle of nowhere or something like that. But within the environment that we're in, and trying to then look to, and sort of goes back to what I said in my first comment on someone's about what is the right thing for the individual kids, as well as I think keeping, touch with, then it goes to your point, with the fellow members of your community, both to support yourself, but also to kind of all triangulate and, achieve some semblance of shared experience and lack of sanity and et cetera, as well as, all of the things where we talk about the success and striving. And I think the more that people do that in isolation, the more it becomes, I've got to get my kid here and do this. And the more that you talk as a group, when you find a bunch of, okay, our kids are all at the same level roughly, let's go put them together and create a positive environment for them. That's what community can be. And there are a lot of things within this community that exist in that way. There are a lot more that can exist, and we should look for those opportunities to create what more that is out there.
As I was reading the book, things kept on, when she would present these challenges, kept on popping in my head, things that we're doing. And so that gave me a lot of comfort. Like, Denise Pope and Challenge Success is highlighted in this book. And I think about all the presentations we've had and how many times I've heard that. And it's, even as a board member, it's still slowly sinking in, because, we can, you can read it and then you have to live it, and then you have to try to apply it to your, your life and your children. But I also think about I don't think when my kids were younger, they used to do these presentations, but now the school counselors do presentations now, in 9th and 10th and 11th and 12th grade. And in 9th grade, you start hearing about the right fit in colleges. And so I think, and Heard and Rye, Lisa Damore was here at Holy Child a few months ago, and I went to hear her speak. So I think that, I appreciate how much we're doing and as a school and as a community, and there's more to do, but there are a lot of things that she talked about in this book that I feel like we are trying to have those community conversations, and we'll continue to do it. But it gives me a sense of hope that we're on the right track a little bit.
I think the idea of around community for our kids, right? And I forget what the number was that Mr. Hara said, but all those additional clubs that they've added this year, 37 new clubs, and finding and creating additional opportunities for our kids to find ways to connect and to matter with one another, because it's important for us as adults to find those people who can be my worry friend. But you want your 14-year-old to have a worry friend too, because in fact, it's probably even more important for the 14-year-old to have a worry friend, because they don't want to talk to adults. Just non-teen parents, it's coming. They don't want to talk to you anymore. And so it's creating those opportunities.
Unless you're driving them somewhere.
And then they just want to tell you where to go. Yeah. But I do, it's building on those opportunities as a school district community and saying, are we ensuring that we're putting the resources to creating these opportunities for our kids to build those communities and to find those things. So they're the kid who was just too darn late to join basketball in 3rd grade, hopefully that child has found something, and they can start maybe a club in high school then, so they can find something, so they can find those connections and find that meaning.
I think though also it's important to look to what types of data we can about what are the outcomes for kids as they go through this process, and understand that data does show that there's, in terms of how someone, how they feel about how their life turned out, actually is not any different between someone who goes to, and we'll put it in the college context here, to a high-ranked college versus someone who went to they mentioned a comparison between like a higher ranked college and a large public university. So that's how they were framing it. But at the end of the day, and this is another quote from Lisa Damore in here, it's, whether your kid goes to Brown or a school that ranks lower on the list does not decide midlife happiness. What does? Having good relationships, purposeful work, and feeling competent in one's chosen pursuits. And so I think the piece to sort of reflect back on is that how we, as a school district, from faculty, from guidance, from our other counselors, our psychologists, teachers everywhere, are we reflecting that this is how we see what we would want for you to have as you go through life, what you would have, what are the steps you have to take in order to get there? Do you have to have the Brown education when in actuality it doesn't make a difference? People are just as happy as if they went to the right place and made their mark when they went there as when they, as a large public university versus like a Brown. I messed that whole sentence up, but I think where I'm going with it is that it's about what you do when you get to those places, not where you go. And that goes back to the fit conversation and all of the other pieces that we've talked about over time. But again, I think it's, you look at what are we modeling, right? So we can talk about this forever, but are we modeling it? Like, are we modeling that in our in our guidance department? Are we only having college banners on the walls, or are we actually modeling more than that? And these are the cues that people pick up on, I think. And so it's just, I think if we want to talk about like success, we have to look at like what's the reality, so that we know when we're walking into it. In reality, people do not say that it was any better because they went to a Brown versus somewhere else. They're still living a fulfilling and purposeful life. And when we come at it from knowing that that's the end result, then the pre-result should be more manageable. You should be able to bring yourself down a little bit when you start to get caught up in the frenzy of like, oh, it has to be X, Y, or Z.
So I can go. So the three of the passages that I was going to discuss have already come up in conversation, either directly by someone or just as part of the conversation. So one of the things I thought would be interesting to bring up now, because we haven't really talked about specific data. So there's 2 points that as I read it, it just kind of, I was like, wow. So on page 41, there are roughly 27,000 high schools in this country. So alone, the 54,000 valedictorians and salutatorians of those schools could fill the incoming classes of the 20 top-ranked colleges and universities twice over. So that was a little bit startling and alarming. And then on page 95, and this is in reference to Sunia Luthar coming to Wilton and surveying the students, I think, in the high school. She found that 30% of them were experiencing internalizing symptoms, including clinically significant levels of depression and anxiety, compared to a national norm of 7%. Moreover, 20% of Wilton students had much above average levels of these symptoms, compared to the national norm of 2%. The data from Wilton was not unique, Luther stressed. It was consistent with other high-achieving schools across the country. And we're not talking about the occasional blues here. We're talking about eating disorders, habits of self-harm, anxiety, depression, and thoughts of suicide. And then there was another quote that I couldn't find, but it was basically saying how in this high achievement situation our kids are in these high-achieving schools, in these communities, it's basically like water that they're swimming in. It's like completely, they're immersed in it, and it's filling every inch of them, around them, in them, and they're just completely drenched and drowning in, it's just filling all their crevices, and it just becomes normal, and they think that's, basically how it is. So I just found those numbers kind of staggering and alarming, and to think we're a very similar community to Wilton, I would guess, from what it sounded like and from what I know. And we know, obviously, there's a mental health crisis right now, and I think it's really great that our community is doing so much to help, and in the schools and in the community with the Rye Youth Council coming into the schools, and the services the school provides on its own. And I know out in the community, people are seeking help privately, but it just feels like it's everywhere, and it just feels pervasive, and it's just sad to think that this is what our kids are swimming in, day in and day out. And it's hard to think, like, how do we shift the culture or do more to help?
I think the best way to shift or to do more is just to have more conversations, have more adult conversations, to be able to create maybe small communities of adults who talk about these things, where you can go, and I think the book even mentioned it, like to be able to go one evening and just sit with 10 or 12 other adults and just talk about the things that you're going through, whether it be, an issue at school, a mental health issue, whatever you're comfortable with, and creating more of those pockets. And I know we always say it's so difficult to get parents to even find the time, but I think depending on the importance, and we're talking about like the health of our child at that point, maybe it's something that we can explore and see if there are types of communities or get-togethers that we can create, even as a district or separate from a district, as a city, to talk about those things so people feel comfortable. Or via text. I know it said also some people are more comfortable just texting back and forth so they don't have to physically be in front of someone, just to have a support system and create a bigger support system, not just a network of people you already know, but to be able to meet new people.
Well, and I think too, if we start to think about what are small things, right? Big things are always hard. Nobody can, you can never start so big, right? So it's, like Dr. Burns' favorite, baby steps, right? And so I know that I've had many conversations with my kids about power schools. I don't have it on my phone. I don't have alerts. I check their report cards. I check their grades when their report cards come out, sometimes 2 or 3 weeks later. I am on a completely different end of the spectrum. I get that. But I have friends who I have conversations with who have alerts on their phone that every time a grade is updated, they get an alert. They then immediately text their child who's in school, who's not supposed to be on their cell phone, to say, why'd you get this grade? And so it's, right, if everybody could just do that, what would that do for the mental health and the achievement toxicity of the community? Where you say, you know what, we're going to talk about your grades once a week. We're going to talk about your grades. Fine, you can't do it once a week. You're going to talk about it at 8 o'clock every night. Whatever it is, but just to find a small way to help give everybody a little bit of a break. And maybe that also kind of goes back to the passage you read, Callie, right, about keeping kids back, not pushing them forward, where we're not constantly talking about their achievement and what did you get, what did you do? And it said a whole thing about, like, when the kid gets in the car, whatever the first question is you ask them is what they believe to be, you think the most important thing is. My kids will always say to me, why do you care so much about what happened at lunch? That's all you want to know about. I'm like, well, because it's just a time of the day where you're social. They're like, oh my God. But because I'm so mindful not to say when they get in the car, hey, how'd that test go that you studied all last night for? Because I don't want them to think, and I know I go to the other end, and that's okay for me. But if we can all find one small thing to do, maybe we can all then collectively help to reduce it.
So I guess just to kind of reflect back on it, the numbers of the college applications and how qualified all the kids are, I think no matter what we do, our kids are just very aware of that situation. And I think a lot of this comes from that as well. It's just, I think it's just scary, and it's scary for them, and they feel like just with the current admissions landscape, like that. I mean, I was in my daughter's senior counseling meeting on yesterday, and he literally was saying, like, every school on her list, like, she has every right to be applying to, but they're schools that she has a very, very small chance of getting into. So it's like, how do you balance that and then have that conversation with your kid? And then, like, her counselor's telling her, like, well, based on your application, your grades, your scores, like, you should apply to these schools, but then you still need some likelies because you're really not going to get into those schools anyway. It's just a very crazy environment right now, and I think even like at home, like we don't talk about their grades, and we don't look at Power School. Like, we do a lot of the same things, and I do the same thing with the lunch conversation. Like, I don't ask about their tests or their quiz, and I always deflect. But it's interesting because I think they just, especially as you get that far into the later years of high school, like, I think it just weighs on them a lot. And it's just, I feel bad for them. It's unfair. Like, even if they've done everything right, it's unfortunate, I guess. And they feel that pressure.
But I think that's where, when they talk about, at some place in here, I think it's the parent-child relationship, that ultimately, they're going to feel that pressure, they're going to potentially be disappointed, they're going to have all of those reactions, and if you're there to be the person that's like, it's going to be okay, because it will. Right? It's like that somebody, I was just listening, I think it's not in here, but it was an analogy somewhere else. You know, when your 4 or 5-year-old comes running towards you and they fall and they skin their knee, and they always look at you first before they start to cry, because they're like, how upset should I be? It's the same thing, I think, as we get higher up in the complexity and you know, the different kinds of emotions that happen as you're dealing with other kinds of things, right? So if you think of your role as the person who's going to be like, yep, that's disappointing, and you're going to be okay, right? Like, I think that's where the parent piece can come in very strongly in that situation. Too bad they can't just skin their knee anymore.
Well, I think too, like, that's when I think back to all the challenge success stuff that was in this book, in addition to things we've been talking about for years. And like from day one, we've always said, like, it's about fit. And, you know, we're not applying to like those top 10 schools that everyone in RIE is applying to. Like, I think the parent perspective can like help in that regard. But then I think they come back to school and they're just hearing it all from the students as well. So like, it's balanced and then it's unbalanced, and they're just kind of like flip-flopping.
Did everyone have a chance to? I think I was keeping track. Any closing thoughts?
People should read the book.
Absolutely. Well, we'll be sending this conversation out to the entire community with a recommendation to read the book. I think it's a very powerful book, as clearly was discussed tonight.
Yeah, I mean, everybody should absolutely read the book. And I think as a district, to go back to what I was doing before, we are putting in a lot of work to address some of the data points and some of the conversations and some of the outcomes that are addressed. And I think we should feel good about the work that we've done and should feel buoyed to continue to do the work, because it needs to be done. And it's a great credit to a strong administrative team who early has seen the value, right? This book is relatively newish, but we've been doing a lot of this stuff well before. And so it's about continuing and powering through and appreciating and identifying the necessity of it and the relevance of the work. So, all right, we will move on then to our hearing of the public on non-agenda items. Seeing no one from the public, I will not read our public statement this evening, but as always, just a plug, you can always feel free to attend a board meeting, or you can always send emails to rcsdboard@ryeschools.org. We're always happy to hear from the public. Can I please have a motion to approve the consent agenda? Sean Klopfer, seconded by Callie Erickson. Let's take a look at this evening's consent agenda. Consent agenda general. Consent agenda fiscal. Ms. Peruccio, if you could just speak to the State Comptroller's Office audit. Thank you.
No problem. So this is something that happens for school districts on a regular basis, approximately every 5 years. However, ours was delayed this last go-round as COVID obviously delayed lots of things, including state audit coming in. Typically what happens is they will come in, they will do a risk assessment audit of all of the different areas that we operate, not just the business office, but operations across the district. Then they focus on a particular area. For us, the auditors came it began in January of 2023. They did their risk assessment and then determined that they were going to do a focus audit on the area of payroll. They were in district for a number of weeks. I believe it was from January to April. And then they did a bunch of remote work after that continued probably through November of '23. We then went back and forth in email, I think, for quite some time, which resulted in a draft report that came to us in January of '24, I believe, was the first report that we saw. The district had the opportunity to review the information provided in that report for accuracy. There was a lot of data that they had gone through, so there were quite a few iterations that we had to go back and forth with the state auditors. This is a very typical cycle, so I don't want anybody to think that this is out of the ordinary. We finally received a final audit report in June of 2024 with 3 findings. I believe the total dollar amount that was cited in the findings resulted in about $238. Focusing on, again, like I said, overtime across the district. One of the findings discussed the budget code detail and description of how overtime is categorized in the budget. The audit is part of the agenda because it is something that the board is required to accept, so that, again, it can be submitted to, so it's the Office of the State Controller that actually comes in and does the audit. The audit then is presented and is living on their website and has been there since June. The district is required to provide a corrective action plan to the 3 findings, which is also included in the documents before the board. And then the audit is to be submitted to the State Education Department as part of our financial packet that is going up for October 15th. I received this direction last week, even though we completed our corrective action plan back in June, but we were just given the direction that it has to be up to the state by October. So that's why it's on this particular board meeting, for the board to accept, so that we can meet that deadline of October 15th.
Okay, great. And I would say an audit finding of $238 out of a budget of, at that time, which was 96 million?
98.
98 million?
Yep.
I'm no mathematician, but I think that's really, really good. I know I make way more errors in my own budget at home, so. All right, so thank you for that. Consent agenda professional. Consent agenda classified. Consent agenda pupil personnel services and special education. And consent agenda curriculum instruction and assessment. Okay, seeing no questions, can I have a vote, all those in favor to approve tonight's consent agenda? That would be, there we go, 7-0. All right, on this evening's consent agenda, we are accepting our external audit, as we had previously discussed, and we had a presentation. We also have our board goals. Our board goals are supporting our curriculum, our social and emotional learning program around the RIE commitment. It also addresses improved communication and engagement with the community. We also speak about behaving in a fiscally responsible manner. And all of these things are tied to the RIE commitment. And the RIE commitment, just as it would happen, is also on this evening's consent agenda. And it speaks to our responsibility to oversee academic and social and emotional development of students. And that really does tie nicely into the conversation that we've had earlier here this evening. We will continue to support our teachers to be able to deliver high-quality, relevant, meaningful instruction to our students, and we'll engage with our families to ensure that our district programs are meeting the goals of the school district. And to our students, we're thinking about creating actions for our kids instead of ideals. So speaking about critical thinkers, effective communicators, collaborators, creative problem solvers, and caring individuals who contribute to a diverse global environment. So again, all things that really do tie so nicely back to our previous conversation related to never enough. We are also accepting the creation of the W. Ward Hayes Scholarship Fund at Rye High School in the amount of $25,000. So we do want to say thank you so much to the Hayes family. We are as I mentioned, our external audit. We also have contracts for literacy training, for DIBELS training for our elementary special education teachers, and 2 days of professional learning for our general ed staff related to literacy instruction. We have an approval of an agreement with Rye Youth Council for district-wide support, which will not exceed $30,000. They don't go beyond, but it doesn't have to go up to that either, anywhere in between. Okay, presentation and discussion number 2, Ms. Boyle, policies.
Thank you. So the 2 policies that are on here for presentation and discussion number 2 are the 2 policies that we reviewed during our last meeting. The one is the use of credit cards, which was a very minor change, but important for efficiency of the business office to do its work. And you can see that in the second line of the policy, the second paragraph, that's just one line. Anyone have any questions about that? Okay. And then we also have changes that were made to the expression of breast milk in the workplace. And these changes primarily were reflecting that in the previous iteration of this policy, the time allotted for employees to have an opportunity to breastfeed or express breast milk in the workplace was not paid, and has now been changed to that it will be paid, and that they can also then, in addition to those 30 minutes, use any other of their break time or other paid time if it's necessary. Those were the largest changes to this, and then some resources related to the Department of Labor and things like that. Any questions there? Okay. So then we will send, or we will have both of these appear on our next agenda to adopt them.
Great. No, I'm done. My microphone's run out. I'm sorry, everybody. I have to go home. Oh, okay, this one works. All right. I'll leave it here so we can share it. All right. So, sorry. Communications to and from the board. We had board and district committees that met. I think we've heard a lot about it, but Mr. Stein, our audit committee, would you like to give an update?
Sure. I mean, we've heard some about that already this evening, but the audit committee met last week, which has representatives both from the board and the community. We have some community members who do a very good job, who have some expertise in this area and really pour through the document and ask very good questions. We had some good in-depth discussions on items, nothing that was of any concerns, but good to sort of go through robustly and make sure that everything is in order. And it was, which is always good. And as we heard tonight, so.
Okay, great. So we have in the future, policy is meeting tomorrow.
Yes.
All right. And then Curriculum Council on October 16th. So we look forward to hearing more about both of those at our next meeting, because our next meeting will be October 22nd, and it's one of my favorites. It's assessment data. Everyone knows how much I love data. So we'll be excited for that, and that will take place here on October 22nd. Any other communications to and from? Okay, seeing none, we are going to adjourn. Can I have a motion to adjourn the meeting? Oh, y'all want to stay? All right, Matt Shibanoff, seconded by Val Lapham. All those in favor? 7-0. Have a good evening.